الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا
This is a presentation of the National Black Legati Association. This is a presentation of the National Black Legati Association. Talk on the jailhouse Muslim. Asafo, Chuma, Asafo. I begin with a quote from Mother Nzinga Pasha, and I quote, "I can remember when my son was taken off to prison. It almost seemed like his death. Strange, I know. But he was fixated on being a hood, a street thug. He served 6 years. I recall reading his letters and noticing how his outlook on life, on black life, was changing, beginning to broaden. He became a Muslim. When he got out of prison, he began teaching the whole family, which got us involved in the local temple, community grassroots activism. It's different now. The Muslim brothers and sisters who come home from jail now are just different. It just isn't the same." End quote. The term jailhouse Muslim is a negative nickname reserved for those who accept Islam while incarcerated, then discards it once released back into the so-called free world. In recent years, this has in fact become common practice, so much so that it has distorted the perception of the faith itself. It has also weakened the once vital elements of this uniting principle, while its professed adherents descend unabated into full-on apostasy, while realizing it not. The state of Islam in general is obviously imperiled by the many forces leveled against it, especially in this post-9/11 climate, forcing the faint-hearted to assume a more docile or passive position, whereby they feel no shame in shirking their duty as Muslims to protect or defend their way of life. This is a pattern that is being increasingly espoused amongst Muslims of every stripe in the American society. However, before delving any further into this subject matter, I think it's important to first point out here that this study isn't an exercise in time-consuming arguments over the myriad doctrines that have come to comprise the Islamic landscape, but rather a critical analysis of the ostensible co-optation and asphyxiation of the revolutionary vigor that once marked the strength of Islam, as it related to empowering and raising the consciousness of black people. Toward this end, I chose the jailhouse Muslim as the premise, because in the place of institutions of higher learning and whatnot, prisons and jails have for many years served as the quasi-schools and academies for scores of black women and men who, while being a national minority, has always made up the vast majority of America's prison demographic. And Islam as a force of transformation once stood as the most salient source, the truth personified in the many women and men who embraced Islam while incarcerated before returning to their respective communities to employ its pragmatic tenets to bring about positive and progressive change, with Malcolm X being perhaps one of the most celebrated instances. However, this once formidable force, as it applies to transforming adverse social conditions, has apparently given way to hollow rhetoric and empty ritual over real, tangible nation building, symbol over substance, as it is commonly put. Nonetheless, communityhood is at the very crux of Islam, as it is, in fact, its lifeblood. Yet it has been substituted for the very antithetical behavior that contravenes the binding covenant of brotherhood / communityhood / nationhood. This is due in large part to the complete inversion of its original paradigm. Put simply, the believers have been conditioned to serve religion as opposed to it being the other way around. Religion is essentially an outgrowth of culture, Therefore, it should never be or take precedence over its adherents, who are, if you look at it, really its purveyors. It should serve as the collective needs or for the collective needs of the people. Moreover, it should be or it should empower the community it governs. Another feature of this inversion can be discerned in the way Islamic law or Sharia is held over its adherents as a fearful threat, which, by the way, is a characteristic endemic to Europeans, to goad a particular pattern of behavior or obedience to the quote-unquote law. Obedience to the law should be more organic, more in line with one's humanity. The law should never contradict the natural or cultural thoughts, words, and actions of the people for whom it is prescribed. This requires a clear-cut distinction between the cultural mores of blacks or Africans and the cultural bearings of non-African peoples. This is of paramount significance because the moment one deems his own culture insignificant is the very same moment he will indubitably subject himself to someone else, which will immediately come in conflict with his inherent cultural spirit. After all, a person is his or her culture. So, for a person to be assimilated into a foreign culture, he will first have to suppress his own cultural reality, which will inevitably cause a quandary of uncertainty, confusion, and ultimately a suspended sense of self, at which time an internal battle will ensue, which will create a perpetual dis-ease of the spirit. That is, until one's original culture is reclaimed. This is the state of affairs with blacks and their indiscriminate subscription to Arab culture, as it often appears or is presented as, quote-unquote, true Islam. Remember, a person is his or her culture. The open acceptance of Arab culture, though a veiled manifestation of black self-hatred, has become a fad within the prison environment. We see it. It has spilled over into the black colony at large, or perhaps it is the other way around. Whatever the case, from the onset of this fad, we have witnessed the deterioration of the spirit of brotherhood, loyalty, and ultimately the authentic spirit of revolution. And the age-old adversaries of black revolutionary movements and warrior formation revel in this cultural stagnation. Even the white devil knows that there can be no real, tangible, meaningful revolution waged by a people bereft of their cultural spirit. For within culture, one finds the innate incentive, power, and fortitude to resist foreign subjugation. It is in this vein that warrior ancestor Amilcar Cabral has elucidated, and I quote, "The value of culture as an element of resistance to foreign domination lies in the fact that culture is the vigorous manifestation of the ideological or idealist plane of the physical or historical reality of the society that is dominated or to be dominated," end quote. In light of the point raised in the quote by Mother Nzinga Pasha at the beginning of this talk, let's now examine the jailhouse Muslim within the context of the standard from which he has deviated. As stated, there was a time when prisons and jails, despite their inherent repressive function, provided a learning and training environment for those who made it so, especially for inner city blacks who were poor from the hustle and bustle of living hand to mouth, had neglected formal schooling and whatnot, or simply could not find the time to rest or study or sober up to think clearly or, most of all, reflect critically on their wretched social predicament. And the black Muslim movement, being the predominant formation in the jails and prisons, spoke not only to the abject conditions of poor black people, but to the very ideology of their destitution, and furthermore offered immediate solutions to self-discipline, self-respect, clean living, collective economics, etc., sending cadres of black men back to their communities with a sense of purpose. And as a result, the black colony took on a new sense of life, Critical to the newly released Black Muslims' smooth transition from prison to freedom was his seamless matriculation into the Black Muslim coterie in the street. The Muslims took care of their own, bottom line. So it was customary for the brothers to go pick up their newly converted brothers at the prison gates and integrate them into the broader purview and overall livelihood of the movement, greatly minimizing the newly converted Muslim's urge or temptation to revert back to his former lifestyle in order to survive. This was brotherhood in action. The section behind the walls and the Muslim movement in the street was tightly connected. It was in effect one brotherhood, set at liberty the captive believer. If a Muslim has a bowl of soup, his or her brother or sister has half. And a brother wants for his or her brother or sister what he wants for his or herself. Were the core pragmatic principles in building trust, respect, loyalty, and camaraderie. In its nation time was the uniformed mantra, the stated mission. The line in the sand was drawn, sharply distinguishing friend from foe. However, these vital elements were eventually co-opted by gangster culture, drugs, and Arab culture, passed off, of course, as quote-unquote real Islam, especially the vaunted achievement of being able to recite as much Arabiya as the next fellow, or contenting oneself with being the most enlightened spiritual leader, etc. Even mastering the fine art of warding off invisible spirits and devils, while black folks collectively receive a real living hell from real living devils. Revolution has taken a back seat to walking like, talking like, and generally behaving like Arabs. And these homogenized, obsequious so-called Muslim leaders of every cloth seem to come with the construction of new prisons to ensure that the revolutionary spirit of its denizens remains dead. J. Edgar Hoover, the late director of the FBI, had as his stated mandate the task to not allow a black messiah to rise up out of the black colony or America's prison. And we can see his mission is still being carried out today. Therefore, any Muslim that preaches mere religious dogma, minus its revolutionary component, as it pertains to uniting blacks around an agenda that serves the collective interests of the entire movement, both in and out of prison, might as well be in the employ of the FBI, whether unwittingly or otherwise. A true black Muslim is one who is in harmony with universal cosmology/cosmogony. He is a provider and protector of his family, community, nation. He is culturally refined. A true black Muslim is, above all else, a sincere brother to his ilk, naturally, and not in the empty rhetorical sense. In fact, our astute warrior ancestor, John Henry Clark, once cogently pointed out that, and I quote, "Now, when you go back to the original culture that you had before the foreign interference, you didn't preach about it. You lived it out. When you created a religion, you didn't say, 'I'm my brother's keeper.' If you are genuinely your brother's keeper, you don't shout it out. You just keep him. You live out the culture. When you get confused between the incubator that created you and the one that enslaved you, you have a problem, which is our present day problem," end quote. The black Muslim movement in the so-called free world is a mere shell of its former self. Egos, infighting, power struggles, hypocrisies, contradictions, abandonment, etc., which spawn irreparable chasms, thus causing a fistful of splinter groups to emerge, only to align themselves one against the other within the parameters of the American capitalist construct, while preaching otherwise to maintain its fading appeal, has sadly become its legacy, with its prison formation, or better yet, deformation, being the most obvious bearer of such a tragic descent into an enfeebled state of existence. The black Muslim movement was once on the move toward black nation building, black independence, black sovereignty, and whatnot. It has now taken on cult-like characteristics in that it isn't moving anymore. It has pretty much squandered its distinction. It has been sub-integrated into the American creed of business as usual. Goddamn shame. And the Muslims and would-be Muslims trapped in the prisons have effectively been abandoned, left in the clutches, completely severed from the broader elements. The greeting, Assalamu alaikum, rings hollow, distressed even. A Muslim's word isn't even bond anymore. Animosities and asinine theological grappling has replaced unity and a focused determination of purpose. Hopelessness and despair abounds. This has effectively attenuated the warrior immune system of the believers, leaving them vulnerable to be washed away by the flood of illusions designed to whisk them into the open arms of counter-revolutionary behaviors. That is, gangsterism, individualism, snitching, drugs, cowardism, homosexuality, integration, and what have you. And this isn't lost on the black colony, who once viewed the brothers admiringly for their demonstrated ability to bring safety, integrity, unity, and economic development to the community, not to mention their ability to restore drug addicts, so-called criminals, and the like. Mother Nzinga Pasha's words, the brothers and sisters who come home from jail now are different, becomes more readily comprehensible in light of the factors already discussed. Further still, not only has the element of abandonment sapped the imprisoned Muslim spiritual alacrity, but they feel they have nothing to come home to or for in terms of a mission within the broader framework of nation building. So they just move lethargically within the myopic routine of ceremonial rituals and prolixic, though empty theoretical spill, devoid of any pragmatism or an unambiguous goal, thereby becoming transfixed in rote religious dogma, which, incidentally, has no place in the vicissitudes of this changing world, the real world, a fact made clear upon release in first contact with reality. So they summarily jettison their faith, along with their incarcerated brethren, when they cross back into the so-called free world. Hence, the jailhouse Muslim.